It's great. It's wonderful to be here, and it's so exciting to hear this conversation, to hear these discussions about big data and predictive analytics, to hear President Obama at South by Southwest last week talking about new technology as for the centerpiece of his administration. When I got here, like so many of you, I'm sure, and maybe still for so many of you, we were running Windows 2002 at our desktop, and this was in 2009. I was front and center in the New York Times, something everybody wishes for, but not for having been the person to put up a commenting feature on the White House website and getting bashed by people looking for the president's birth certificate, looking for the UFO containing the president's birth certificate, or generally complaining about some aspect of government, as people are wont to do. I was, in fact, at the time, I recall being told I should not mention the word open government or new technology or, God forbid, open source when President Obama is in the same hemisphere, let alone in the same room. So we've come a long way, baby, in terms of the public adoption of technology, the embrace of technology to do things differently and to govern differently. The seeds were planted long ago, of course, through the work of many people in this room who've been in the technology and public sector field for a long time, but publicly in terms of policy pronouncements back in 2009, when President Obama, in his first day in office, signed the Memorandum on Transparency and Open Government, saying we're going to use technology to govern differently, to do things in new ways that are transparent, in ways that are participatory, and in ways that are collaborative. And transparency is very much about the story, it's the policy side of the story we've been hearing today, which is the government is going to put the data that it holds out there, and more importantly, to make use of that data to govern better and to do things differently. Not just the data about how government works, not just the usual spending data that everybody wants and demands and is entitled to have, but what we called high-value data. Data about securities markets that we heard about today, data about healthcare and patients that we just heard about, data about farmers markets and bridges and everything in between, the data that we collect in the government about economy, about society, from the companies that we regulate, that give us a picture of how the country works and how to make it work better. The policy story about open data is very much intertwined with the technology story about big data, right? These predictive analytic techniques, the use of big data to spot problems and to find solutions becomes possible. We have an underlying policy to make data available in raw formats, freely downloadable as data sets that we can mine, not simply as PDFs that we can access. And there's a bigger story, an unfolding story about the way that data is transforming government and society that goes beyond the data that government holds and includes the data that scientific research organizations hold and universities hold, that companies hold, and that they are sharing back, often combining with government data to do social good. But we're going to talk mostly today about the technologies, first of data, as they enable us to do more evidence-based decision-making. And then I want to talk about another technological development, the one that's coming in the next 5 years, the data that we're using to drive not the data and transparency story, but the participation story. But let me come back to that in a moment. Many of you, I'm sure, everybody in this room has been on data.gov, has probably put data on data.gov. To make more data available, as the United States and 70 other countries and countless states and cities are now doing, to the end of doing a number of things better. First and foremost is, of course, improving government, using data to change the way government works. So in Mexico, they're putting up the data about school spending and school performance, and with that data, you can then spot, not surprisingly perhaps, that there are 1,512 people in the state of Hidalgo, all of whom are on the government payroll, all of whom are exactly 102 years old, and have exactly the same birth date. And then, of course, you can hopefully go to remove those people from the government payroll. That's what Brazil has been doing since 2004, when it, long before the United States, created a budget transparency portal. A portal, I might add, that gets 900,000 page views every day in a country that is sadly known for its corrupt practices. But by putting up the data and being able to scrutinize and see how government officials are spending money, they can overnight cut the spending on government credit cards by over 25%. It's not a story of technology. It's a story about opening up the window onto how government works. It's what they've been doing in the village squares of Rajasthan in India, where they're taking government data, government budget data, and writing it on the wall, and then asking people to participate in the process of spotting those people who are dead and on the payroll, or the bridges built to nowhere that shouldn't be there. It's about that conversation that happens between citizens and government to the end of helping government to do its job better, more efficiently, and with less cost. But the open data and the big data story are very much one not just of government doing things differently, but government helping to empower citizens to make decisions and solve problems for themselves in new ways. So in Tanzania, where they've built 2 data dashboards, one called Shula and one called the openeducation.org dashboard, they're putting up data not just to help the government do a better job of running the school system, but to help parents and students and researchers understand where are the performance deficits in their system, to be able to make better choices about where to send their own kids to school, and to allow citizens to be part of that process. So it's just as much about changing how we make decisions about our healthcare, about our education, et cetera, as it is about how government makes decisions. It's also very much becoming a story about economic opportunity. At the GovLab where I work, we are part of an international network called the Open Data 500 Network. Countries like Italy, Australia, Canada, Korea, and the United States, I'm missing a few, who are tracking the companies that are being created. I don't just mean startups. I also mean big companies that are generating new divisions and new products using government data that's building jobs and creating economic value. And that data is also helping not just to help people create data-driven businesses, but to help people, average people, do business. So if I'm a florist or a jeweler in New York City, and I want to know where I should open my shop, I don't have access to the same kind of business analytics that a Starbucks does to know exactly what the foot traffic is and exactly what the median income is on a given corner where I'm going to put my shop. But I can instead go to the business atlas that the city has created and have access to exactly that same kind of data, allowing me to know where I should create my business and where I should set up shop. Ultimately, this data story, as we've heard about all day, is about helping us to solve public problems better. It helps us to spot the problems, to see that waste, fraud, and abuse, and to come up with the solutions that we can now devise when, in the case of a very serious problem like Ebola, you have countries and international organizations getting together to develop the solution to stop this scourge. Why? Because they're creating data exchanges, like the Ebola GeoNode, or the HDX Humanitarian Exchange, where they created a data situation room, creating comprehensive daily real-time updates to spot outbreaks and be able then to develop the solutions that ultimately ended up working. So there's a lot of benefits and advantages to the data story that we're all quite familiar with and that we've heard tell about, right? This predictive analytic technologies, the big data mining techniques, combined with the policies of open data and access to data, are allowing us to do things differently. But what has not yet developed as quickly is these other 2 parts of this vision for transforming government, right? We get the idea about transparency and all that it can do. But what happens to participation and collaboration? So in part, data is giving us the raw material by which government can communicate and collaborate and solve problems with citizens. That really is part of the story. But there's also a way in which technology and the technologies of data can help us to engage with people better than we've done before. So we have the beginnings of this movement of citizen engagement and participation. It's been around for a long time, and we've put it on steroids with a bit of technology by asking people, as they do in the UK on the e-petition site, or in the US on the We the People site, asking people for their opinion about how government should work. And this is a new way to communicate with government that didn't work before, and the president mentioned it when he was in Texas. Before, if you want to get something on the public agenda, right, you have to have a voice into your congressman, you have to be a lobbyist, but now you can sign a petition. You can post a petition if you want for building the next Death Star, or deporting Justin Bieber back to Canada. I'm curious how many people in this room signed. I want to ask you about the Justin Bieber one, but how many people have signed a petition on this website? We have, the lighting makes it hard to see, but quite a number of people. Should I ask you whether you signed the Death Star petition? I'm thinking you did. You did, yes. Didn't work, did it? Fail. And what's the problem? The problem is that we're asking people how they feel, and we're not asking them enough about how to do it differently, right? Government needs the blueprint. If you're going to build a Death Star, you need a blueprint. You need to know how to do it. You need to know how much it's going to cost. You need to know who else has built a Death Star, right? If you're a busy policymaker, if you're in the jobs that you're in day to day, just having more people make demands of you, not that helpful. But it's a start. And now we're beginning to use technology to go that next step, to actually ask people to do for their country, not only to demand of their country. So in São Paulo, Brazil's largest city, starting back in November, they said, you know what? We don't know enough in government about technology and innovation, so we're going to ask people, regular people, non-government workers, to teach the government about technology. And they set up something called Open Government University, if I have the name correct. And they have 24,000 civil servants now taking classes from the public, from citizens, as part of this program. And they're expanding over the course of the next year. We are asking people to give of their good ideas, not just of their opinions. So if you last month would go on the web, you could tell Madrid, I think it's still open for comment, you can tell Madrid how to write its transparency law and do it better. You can tell the mayor of Paris how to improve the city of Paris. I was just on the phone with a congressional staffer discussing how she's going to put up a piece of legislation, I won't say which one yet, to get good, hard evidence for how to build the case for that legislation. Again, not just a popularity contest, but actually ideas from people, actual know-how. I got my start doing a lot of this work, or at least the project that I had done in the past that was the best known, was a project to create the first expert network for the United States Patent and Trademark Office. We had this crazy idea. It grew out of teaching a class to a bunch of students about intellectual property, in which I explained to students who are using YouTube and Twitter and Facebook about how a person sits in an office in Virginia and has 15 hours to examine a bunch of documents and make a decision that will affect, whole markets and industries. 20-year grant of monopoly rights. And instead, the students said, wow, couldn't we just, this was actually before Twitter, I should say, but couldn't we just put this on the web? Couldn't we just ask people? Couldn't we just ask people to give their ideas and know-how? And so was born a project that was then replicated in a number of countries and later really became the basis for the Open Government Initiative. The idea that we could ask scientists and technologists and others who are out there to lend their know-how to improve the patent examination process with the benefit of their experience, not simply their opinions. This then grew into the model that became, back in 2010, the challenge.gov website. So let me test you on this one. How many people have been on challenge.gov? Not as many as I would have thought in a Washington audience. I'm used to not as many people knowing it outside of Washington. So I won't then ask how many people have responded to a challenge on challenge.gov, such as the offer of a prize to remove the salt from salt water, or to reduce the word gap between the number of words that a young child in a poor family hears versus the words that a rich child hears before the time that they're 5, significantly impacting their educational, health, and other outcomes in the life of that child. These are hard problems that are up there. Yes, there are also challenges like designing a t-shirt and coming up with a recipe and other things that are quick and easy to answer. But these are things that demand of our know-how and our expertise. Just last month, the European Food Safety Agency said, we're going to stop trying to decide behind closed doors what it should be the ways in which we mitigate the risk of foodborne illness. Instead, we're going to turn to the crowd. We realize that we don't have all the answers. As Lori said, she's a data person, not a hardware person, not a security person. She needs the help from other people who are out there, and they've said similarly, we need the help from scientists and from smart people. But the problem has been the reason that you haven't been on challenge.gov, I would suggest, and that you haven't all signed the Death Star petition, and that government, frankly, does not, with the exception of the data story, does not look significantly different than it did 10 years ago, is the problem of the open call. It's the problem of saying, hello, is anyone out there who can help me build a Death Star? Because I bet you know how to build a Death Star, but you didn't know that they needed to know. You didn't know about the opportunity. No one asked you. So as simple as that, as simple as the fact that what we do in business, when we use all these predictive analytic techniques are used in business to segment the marketplace, to identify your customer, to target the person who's more likely to buy your product, and to send that person an ad, we don't even do a fraction of that in government to try to match the people who have the know-how we want, the people who might be the paramedic or the doctor, and I'll explain this project in a minute, the person that we need with a particular skill. We have a hard time finding those people, and therefore we don't do a very good job of getting answers when we do ask. So part of it is the challenge of finding people. Part of it is the cultural problem that in government it is still very uncommon to say, I don't know. I worked on a project to try to build citizen engagement in government when I served in the Obama administration. And the project, details to one side, the project died because I couldn't find anybody willing to publicly ask a question. This is not unique to this administration or any administration. It's unique to the culture of government, particularly government in a highly partisan culture in which we are terrified to say we don't know. We're terrified to do what techies do every day, which is to go on Stack Exchange or another Q&A site or go on the web and say, does anybody know the line of code that will help me do X? Does anybody know whether I'm supposed to water my begonias twice a week or once a week? Does anybody know which aperture to use on my camera? You go on Stack Exchange, you can find answers to these highly granular questions. You go in government and you want expertise, what do? You spend 3 years standing up a federal advisory committee under the Federal Advisory Committee Act because God forbid you ask a question, you're going to violate the Paperwork Reduction Act, and we don't want to do that. And so we go to stand up a committee, and what do? Well, you get 10 people and you convene them 3 times a year in DC. They write you a nice PDF of 100 pages at the end of the day. Not quite the same thing. So let me put to you that the same technologies, the same data-driven technologies that are helping us to make more evidence-based decisions can also help us not just to find the raw evidence and data and material, but can help us to find the people that we need that can help us make sense of all the data, that can help us make sense of the information, can help us find the solutions that we want. If we move from the open call, the hello, is anyone out there, to actually doing a little bit of targeting, a little bit of marketing, if you will, to let us find the people who can help us solve the problem. So if we have a pandemic or an emergency like an Ebola or a Zika or whatever's coming up, can we find the people who actually have that experience? When we have the cybersecurity problem, we have very smart people. Most of them were sitting up on this stage and some of them are in the audience. How do you find each other in order to address the challenges that we face? How do we find the creative people and do a better job of tapping their expertise, but also giving them and us an opportunity to participate in our government? Some people like to call this trend the world of people analytics, right? The world of using more data about what we know about ourselves, about what we can do, either our credentials or our experience. And we're starting to see the beginnings of use of technology to do a better job of matching people, of doing that kind of brokering to connect people to problems. It's what I like to think about as Tinder for government or Match.com for government, right? We do a great job of this for dating, making visible and searchable certain characteristics about ourselves. I like long walks in the rain, and what is that song with the margaritas? Long walks in the something, beach, park, you get the idea. I like long walks. You want somebody who likes long walks? Boom, there you go. Why can't we do a better job of that for public service? We're seeing some examples. So in Health and Human Services, for example, they're beginning to stand up a project that is called, I think it's now called the Experts.gov Project. It grows out of FDA. And it's an effort essentially to mine the credentials and abilities of people, not just in FDA, but soon across HHS, to better match people to opportunities to serve on medical device review panels. A job that is hard, requires a certain expertise, and which cannot be done well enough or fast enough to please anyone at the moment. The agency needs to do a better job of finding experts. But it's not just about finding people with certain biomedical degrees, it's also about finding people who may have certain kinds of expertise and know-how. So take another public institution up the street, the World Bank, where they've taken 27,000 of their employees and alumni and contractors and put them on a website, an expert network, where they're tracking what their experience is, what their skills are, what languages they speak, where they've worked on projects, and then they've married that to a help desk. So that if you need to know how to build a well in Sierra Leone, you can find someone else who's also done a well building project in another country, or may have experience in the region in which you're working, and tap into their know-how quickly. This is very much tied into efforts that many countries have. The UK is one, the US is another, of trying to reinforce and build on the skills and ability of the civil service and public service. And if you're interested in more examples, I've put up a link here to some case studies that we've been working on that are very much focused on how public agencies in particular are using technologies to tap into and engage with their employees in more effective ways. I just finished reading a new draft of a project coming out of the State Department called Corridor. Again, one in which I think they have 23,000 employees now on an expert network, mining their skills, their experience, and what they call their tacit knowledge. The stuff you really need to know about how to get things done in the real world, not just the credentials that people have, and using that to do your job better. The next wave of this, though, is what we do to use technology to target not just people within the civil service, within government, but also outside the public sector among citizens. So these same kinds of networks, for example, the Vivo Web project grows out of an NIH grant to Florida and to Cornell, is spawning lots and lots of these networks like AgriVivo. There's Vivo, there's AgriVivo. In other words, networks of people with credentialed expertise in agriculture. So when you have a farming question, you can reach out to them and get the know-how that you need. But ultimately, what we want, again, is not just the credentials, not just the stuff we can find on LinkedIn, but also that tacit knowledge, that know-how that people have. So this is why the upstart political party Podemos in Spain has building a project they call the Banco de Talentos, the talent bank of their party members, of their citizens. So now that they move from campaigning into governing, they run the mayoralty of Madrid and Barcelona. They have seats in parliament now, and they desperately need the know-how that the people in their community can bring to bear to help them tackle and solve Spain's problems. The county of Torfaen in Wales, a place so small I couldn't even tell you where it is, but they've turned around and said, and they partnered with Cisco and said, you know what? We have a lot of knowledge here that you can't get on Facebook. You can't get it on Stack Exchange. We have local knowledge about what it means to do things in our community. So yes, you may have diabetes, and you get lots of information on WebMD about diabetes, but having diabetes in our community is a very special kind of expertise and skill that requires the information that other people have in their heads about what it means to manage that condition. If you are a young person and they have a lot of unemployed young people, you desperately need the know-how that comes from business owners and entrepreneurs and their older people, and it's a community that's disproportionately older. We need to tap into their wisdom to help you start a business, to get a job, to create your own endeavor. And so they've built their own local version of this tool, and they're growing this out to say we want to capture this tacit knowledge of the people in our town and in our borough. We have a lot we need to do to get from here to there. We have to, above all, recognize and trust in the fact that our neighbors, whether they sit next to us in the office in which we work or they sit on the other side of the globe, that they are smart. They have knowledge, they have experience, and that people will be willing to share it if we ask them. But we have to enable those processes. We have to change the laws that now make it difficult to do that. And so for those people in the government, I'm sure the Paperwork Reduction Act is not lost on anybody who's spent any time in the public service. Laws that are designed for a paper-based world in which there are restrictions, created very well-intentioned restrictions designed to minimize corruption, but that get in the way today of actually going online and asking a question. We need new tools that help us actually identify who knows what. So every night I go on Duolingo, and my son and I, we study Spanish. And now, according to Duolingo, I can now report I'm now 7% fluent in Spanish. And I have mastered the modules on flirting and Christmas. So I can, flirt with you at Christmas time. But what I do is I get a badge from Duolingo, a digital, durable, authenticated badge that I can put on my LinkedIn page, that I can put on my website, so that if you happen to need somebody who knows how to flirt at Christmas time, you can find me. But joking aside, there are initiatives now, and many of them, and I'm sure many of you have taken courses on Udacity or Coursera or been on another website that gives you a badge, that gives you some kind of a digital searchable indicator of a kind of expertise or experience. At my university, if you get a degree from our School of Professional Studies, they'll give you a diploma printed on the laser printer, like most universities do, but they'll also give you an escrowed badge so that you can have this digital indicator that becomes more searchable. And then you have foundations like Lumina or like the Chamber of Commerce, which are very much for private as much as for public reasons, saying we need to actually understand what those badges mean. We need to know what skills are represented by the fact that you are 7% fluent in Spanish. What does that mean you actually know? Private sector people want this. They want it because they want to do a better job of matching people, employers to employees, right? If you're Google, you don't want to hire somebody just because they have a degree from a fancy university. You want to know that they can code. So they're looking for ways to know that people actually have the skills, not just the credential. And we can take advantage of that same infrastructure of expertise that we're building for private purposes, we can also use for public purposes. It's probably going to mean we have to build some new kinds of expert networks. We're playing with some of these at GovLab. We call it the Network of Innovators because we're trying to experiment with understanding what would it mean to build these tools for public purposes and public officials, not just for private ones. And we're going to have to do a lot more experiments, right? We're going to have to study whether the EPA's expert network called Skills Marketplace, where you post your project and let people find the project, works better or worse than that HHS project, which is based on Harvard's Catalyst profiles, where you post the person and you find the person and match them to the project. I don't know which one of these works better. We can experiment and we can test it, but what we can do a better job of is doing that kind of matching. Making that happen, though, is going to depend on our willingness as individuals, as organizations, as institutions, to be willing to put ourselves out there, to say we have a skill and we want people to find it so that we can use it for public good. And I would argue we have to do this. We have to do it because it's the way that we're going to invigorate our concept of citizenship, the way that we're going to engage, but also it's going to be the way that we solve problems. So I never miss an opportunity. If anybody gives me a microphone, I never miss an opportunity to talk about this project and its sister project in the UK. And so I will ask you again, how many people, let's see if I do any better than my Death Star, how many people are signed up for PulsePoint? Oh, it's a tough crowd. All right, if there's nothing else that you take away from me today, and I can't see it, maybe you're all in the balcony, please sign up for PulsePoint if you possess one skill. You must know how to do CPR. And if you don't know how to do CPR, the one thing you should do after you leave today is to go up and please sign up for a course to remind yourself how to do CPR. Because then this technology, it's like a badge, right? This indicator that you have that you know how to do CPR, PulsePoint uses an open data feed of 911 calls together with a registered list of people who know CPR and matches those people. So that when I have a heart attack and you know CPR, the app co-locates us and you can rush to my aid. For every minute sooner that you get to me, my life expectancy doubles. says the National Institutes of Medicine. So when PulsePoint starts its project, it grows out of California. These dots represent the traditional government first responders, fire, police, ambulance, etc. A year later, you get the citizen first responders. This becomes the coverage of first response. This is a radical transformation in government's ability to do well by citizens by doing with citizens. And what we do for CPR and matching this one skill to save lives, we can do in 100 other ways to tap into the skills and know-how that people have. So let me close. This should be a quote because this is from Obama, not from me. Or maybe he stole it from somebody else, but it's either always said by Mark Twain, Lincoln, right now it's always Mark Twain or Lincoln or Voltaire said this, but whoever it was, the most important office in a democracy is the office of the citizen. And we have this opportunity thanks to new technology and thanks to the technologies of data that we've been using for the last 5 years and will use more of, but thanks to the technologies of expertise that will become, I think, the next wave of transformation in government over the next 5 years, we have this opportunity to play our part, to get involved, and to do well by doing good. Thank you.